Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a Sunday edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I am, as always, your host, Joe Healy. I'm here to recap Saturday's action around the SEC and then get you ready for Sunday's games as well. This is, as you see the banner at the bottom, a pre-recorded episode. My apologies for having that be the case. Working some games for ESPN Plus this weekend in the start time, and my game today makes it to where I'm unavailable to do a live show. Got to be at the ballpark before I would have finished the live show. So obviously that's not going to work. So my apologies in advance on that. Live shows will be back next weekend, starting with Friday's show. Should be live shows all weekend, barring some sort of change that I don't anticipate. We're going to break the format today a little bit in that not doing game of the day. We're just getting right to kind of the big stories here. And that's a couple of losses that I think are surprising in different ways, but notable both. And let's start with High Point 6, Florida 2. Let me pull up the box score here. So not the game of the day, because honestly was not that compelling a contest, because you see there in the line score, High Point scores 5 runs in the third and then just kind of salts the game away. It was a 5-run third inning, largely spurred by an error on Brendan Lawson. There was a play where High Point had a runner. There was a ball in the hole. High Point has a runner going around third because they're anticipating maybe that ball either getting through and going into the outfield, or Lawson trying to make a play at first base and the runner being able to score. Lawson clocks it, though. The runner coming around third makes the throw to home to try to get the out there. The throw is wild. It happened with 2 outs. High Point pours it on after a big RBI double over the head of the center fielder, and then a little bloop single, and just kind of was one play that just led to this avalanche of runs for High Point, and that's how they go up 5-0. And so, relatedly, you look at Aiden King's scoreline, not his best start, certainly not going to make that argument, but not all on him. As you see there, not a single earned run, and he still hasn't allowed, his ERA is still 0. Hasn't allowed an earned run all season. Looked fairly strong in this start. He threw 91 pitches. His velo is a little bit down, but he's out there pitching fairly well. And so, choose your own adventure on whether you'd like to be anxious about Aiden King's velocity maybe not being back where it was at points last season, and whether you think there's something going on there. The word is still just that, him being pulled last week was a finger cramp. So time will tell, but he's still pitching relatively effectively. You see there, he gave up 7 hits in those 3 innings. That's a lot, but didn't walk but 1 guy, struck out 5. So hard to quibble too much with the performance ultimately. But still something to monitor moving forward. What else in this game? Let me go over to the visitor side, because the player of the game was Ty Brackbill, the starter for High Point. 6 2/3 innings, 4 hits, 2 runs, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts. He threw 98 pitches, 68 of them for strikes. Florida didn't score. Those 2 runs for Florida came in the 7th inning. So he held the Gators scoreless all the way into the 7th inning with 2 outs when he was pulled. So it's back-to-back days where Florida has just been flummoxed by a High Point starter. It was Wade Walton in Friday's game. It was Ty Brackbill yesterday, and that's the part that I think is most surprising to me, is just the way that those High Point pitchers have been able to navigate the Florida lineup 2 days in a row. Because the pitching for Florida, even though in both cases, Friday and Saturday, there were more runs scored than you might have anticipated against really strong Florida pitchers. When you watch the games, you can kind of see it's a lot of bloops. It's a lot of balls that are just it's a lot of 2-strike hitting from High Point, just like putting the ball in play and hoping good things happen, and good things have been happening. It's not as if it's a laser show, but the offense for Florida just has not been able to really get any sustained momentum in this series. And to me, that's the bigger surprise for me, is just the way in which High Point pitching has been able to totally control this series through the first 2 days. And that's my big picture takeaway here, is that High Point has just outplayed Florida for these first 2 games. Like, yes, there are some fluky things with High Point has gotten a lot of bloopers to fall, but there is something to be said about the two-strike approach that High Point uses, emphasis on putting the ball in play, trusting that good things will happen when they do that. That is a strategy. So while it looks fluky and there is some good fortune in there, it is not an accident that it's happening this way. So I think High Point deserves a lot of credit for just outplaying Florida through 2 games, playing cleaner baseball, certainly, through 2 games. The defense has also been great for High Point. That has been a highlight. They've just made play after play these first 2 weekends, or I'm sorry, first 2 games of the weekend. And that's been a big catalyst as well. So that is one game. The other one, as you could probably guess, pull up the box score here, is Sacramento State 5, LSU 4. Weird game in a couple of fronts. One is again, it was the disappearing act of LSU's offense, which seems to kind of come and go. There have been plenty of games where LSU has scored plenty, including Friday against Sac State. But there have been too many games so far this season, like this one, where LSU doesn't get going or just gets going too late, and just can't do enough offensively. And I don't know what to make of that, because we see the potential of this lineup. It's not as if this has been a problem all year. There are teams for which, you can look at issues like this offensively and just say, well, this is just kind of who they are. That, this is going to maybe be a little bit of a struggle offensively the rest of the way. I think we're starting to get there with Tennessee, where we're like, maybe this just kind of is who they are offensively, and they're going to have to win games on the mound and just try to scratch enough together offensively. I don't think that's the case with LSU. Like, they've shown too much potential to score runs in bunches for me to think that's the case with them. But they have shown this tendency to have these types of games where, let's just use this one as an example. They don't score a single run until the 8th. And credit Sacramento State's pitchers. We'll go down there to the box score. Their first couple of guys did a really nice job. But again, you see with they walked 7 LSU batters, so there were they hit 2 guys. So like, there are base runners, and LSU's just wasn't cashing them in. It's not as if these first couple of guys were striking out a bunch of guys and piling up the innings, and they were just throwing. They just kept throwing, right, and just kind of kept working around trouble and navigating it. On the flip side, one of the other things that makes this a weird game is that every single run was driven in by this gentleman here, Cameron Sewell, the 7-hitter in the lineup. He had, if we go up to the scoring, you'll see it. He had an RBI double in the 2nd inning, and then the big blow in the 8th inning had a grand slam that put, at the time, Sac State up 5-0. That seemed to kind of actually wake up LSU a little bit. It's almost like when that grand slam left the park, LSU kind of all collectively at the same time realized, like, oh, we need to get a move on here. So they score 3 runs in the 8th. They score a run in the 9th on a Daniel Harden home run, Daniel Harden pinch hit home run. They landed deep in the bleachers in right field, but it ultimately wasn't enough. They just got going too late. Put some runners on in the 9th inning after the Harden home run and just couldn't cash them in. And that was largely kind of the story of the game. And now suddenly, this rubber game today, the series was kind of looking like a relative walkover for LSU after Friday's 15-4 win. And now all of a sudden you're looking at it and you've got a pretty important rubber game in front of you here. And, you mess around with the way in which you did on Saturday and you could find yourself in a little bit of trouble. So that there is going to be there should be a sense of urgency today for LSU as they try to avoid a series loss to Sac State. All right, let's get over to player of the day. All right, here we go. All right, player of the day candidates. And as we go through this, we will talk about the games along the way. As longtime listeners, viewers of this show will attest, the player and pitcher of the day are largely just an excuse to give me a way to to talk about some of these games along the way, but we do like to highlight the players that had the best days. Drew Wires from Mississippi State, 3 for 3 with 3 runs scored. Also Noah Sullivan, 3 for 4 with 2 home runs and 6 RBIs. That was in a 26-0 win for Lipscomb, and I forgot to highlight Noah Sullivan here because it needed to be somebody. The player that he needed to be somebody from Mississippi State when you score 26 runs. So we're going to make it Noah Sullivan with his 2 home runs and 6 runs batted in. Just after 2 relatively routine wins, just a complete blitzing of Lipscomb, 26-0. Those 2 guys were at the not a lot to say about that game otherwise, except that it was just a boat race. For Texas A&M, Caden Sorrell, 3 for 3 with a homer, 3 runs batted in. Nico Partita, one of the fabulous freshmen playing for Texas A&M, 3 for 4 with a home run. Gavin Grahovac, 3 for 4 with a double in that one. Texas A&M 12-1 winners over Oakland. Not a lot to say there. They just handled their business against Oakland the way that you would expect A&M to handle its business against a team like Oakland. Bryce Fowler, 3 for 5 with a double and 4 runs batted in. That was in a 9-3 win for Alabama over North Florida. Alabama also just taking care of business in its series against UNF. Georgia with a double header yesterday against Queens. In game 1, Colby Branch, 2 for 3 with 2 home runs, 5 runs batted in. And then in game 2, Colby Branch, 2 for 4 with a home run and 3 runs batted in. So in that doubleheader, 4 for 7, 3 home runs and 8 RBIs. Look at Joe do that math on the fly. So 4 for 7, 3 home runs, 8 RBIs for Colby Branch in both ends of that doubleheader win over Queens. That was a 13-5 victory, and then 11-0 in 7 innings in the second game of that doubleheader. Speaking of doubleheaders, South Carolina also had one, in this case against Princeton. This series did not start until Saturday. It was scheduled for a Saturday doubleheader start. Ethan Lizama in game 2 of that doubleheader, 2 for 3 with 2 doubles and a walk. South Carolina swept it. It wasn't the easiest doubleheader sweep you'll ever see, but they win 10-7 in the first game and 4-3 in the second game. They finished that series up today. Tennessee, Henry Ford, 3 for 5 with a home run. Reese Chapman, 3 for 4 with a double and a home run. Another narrow win over Wright State, 5-4. Felt like a very similar game, not in terms of it wasn't a walk-off, but more just in terms of, Wright State came to play and Tennessee just couldn't. Tennessee did enough to win and deserve a lot of credit for that against a pesky Wright State team, but Tennessee just couldn't shake Wright State. You just kind of kept waiting for both days. You've kind of just waited for Tennessee to say, okay, enough is enough, and just pour it on. And that hasn't happened. Maybe it's coming today in the finale of the series, but it hasn't happened the first 2 games. But again, I've said this about a million times. In non-conference, you kind of don't ask how, you just ask how many when it comes to games you've won. And Tennessee has won the first 2 games of the series against Wright State. Brendan Brock for Oklahoma, 2 for 4 with a double, a hit by pitch, and a stolen base. They were back on the field after a Friday cancellation, back on the field Saturday, and collected an 8-0 win over Santa Clara, did the Sooners. For Arkansas, Cam Kojal, 3 for 4 with a double and a walk. Micah New, 3 for 3 with a double and 3 runs batted in. Arkansas, a 13-1 win over Stetson, and that's been a really impressive weekend the first 2 days for the Razorbacks, just because Stetson is a solid program. They were a regional team last year. We'll see how good they are this year. Still TBD on that, but it's a proud program that was in a regional last year. And those first 2 days of that series, they've really taken care of business there and not given the Hatters really any belief in that series. And that's impressive stuff there. Missouri has a bunch of guys on here because they had an offensive outburst in the first of 2 games. Friday's game was suspended, rolled over to Saturday, so they finished that game. It was a 13-12 UIC win, and then Mizzou finished off the day with a 7-0 win over UIC. A couple of things there. Let's get to the players first. Cam Durnan in game 1, 3 for 5 with a double and a home run. Caden Peer in game 1, 3 for 5. Note those are 2 guys who have been out with injury. They did not come back until the midweek. The Thursday opener against UIC. That series started on Thursday. Those were the first game. That was the first game back for both of those guys, and now they're impacting the game in a big way here. Chris Patterson in game 1, 3 for 4 with a walk. And then in game 2, Tyler Macon, 2 for 3 with 2 doubles and 2 walks. Tyler Macon now hitting .508 on the season, has been hot as really anybody in the SEC, and is impacting the game in a lot of ways. Like he's getting on base a ton. A lot of it is hits. He's batting .508. He's stealing some bases. Really dynamic player for Missouri so far this season. And now I'm fascinated to see how Missouri does in conference play. They start off with Auburn at home next weekend, and Missouri looks like they could be a little bit frisky. They've won 11 games in a row, and again, I've said this a bunch the last couple of weeks, but the schedule has not been good. The quality of opponent has not been particularly good, just in general. But there's a lot of games in here that Mizzou would have lost last year, including the resumed game yesterday. They won 13-12. At one point, it was 12-1 UIC. That is 100% a game Mizzou loses last year, like not even a question. And they probably lose it 15-4, right? Like it would not be a game they were competitive in, more than likely, and they come back and win it. And so that is a difference, and we'll see how much it ends up mattering in SEC play. That's ultimately what's going to determine how good the season is for Missouri. But this team has been different in terms of their ability to win games in which they've been dealt some adversity. So impressive day yesterday for Missouri. They deserve to have the guys on here. They did. For Texas, Timo Becerra continues to swing a hot bat, defensive-minded infielder, but he's really swinging the bat well. That was in Texas's 11-9 win over USC Upstate. That game got really dicey at the end. USC Upstate scored 6 runs in the ninth. It was 11-3. It ends 11-9. Tying run came to the plate in the person of Henry Zenner for USC Upstate, who's one of their best hitters. So it got real there. Texas had to cycle through a number of pitchers in the ninth inning to get those final outs. So that got a little bit scary for Texas, but they finish it off. They win 11-9 and secure that series victory. Mason McCrane for Auburn, 2 for 5 with a double and 5 runs batted in. That is in Auburn's 8-1 win over Winthrop. Kudos to the Tigers for taking care of Winthrop in the first 2 games of that series without much of an incident there. Jace Tarnish for Kentucky, 2 for 5 with a homer and 3 runs batted in. A 12-7 win over the Citadel. For a lot of this game, it looked like a relatively routine Kentucky win, and then all of a sudden the Citadel woke up late and took a 7-6 lead after the top of the 8th inning. In the bottom of the 8th inning, Kentucky answers with 6 runs of its own, and that was all she wrote. So good job by Kentucky there to punch back after it got punched a little bit. That's what you want to see in that situation. Another subpar start for Ben Cleaver. He has just not been, considering how good he was last year, particularly, he's just not been sharp so far this season. He only gets through 3 innings. He walked a handful of guys. It wasn't the Ben Cleaver that we saw last year. And the good news for Kentucky is that the pitching in general has been good enough to where it hasn't been a huge deal yet, that Cleaver has not been as sharp as, certainly not as he was last year, and not as sharp as everyone with Kentucky had hoped. But now the hope is just that, he can turn it around and he can get it going in time for conference play starting next weekend. And then for Vanderbilt, Riker Waite, 2 for 3 with a double and a walk. That is in Vanderbilt's 10-0 win in 8 innings against North Dakota State. Similar story there to what we talked about with some of these other teams. Just 2 games, 2 relatively routine wins. This weekend in particular, this final weekend before conference play, that's what you're looking for. And we see with teams like Florida and with LSU how frustrating it can be when you can't just, roll through this weekend and roll into conference play. If you end up in a firefight, in this final weekend, it's not ideal as you go into conference play. All right, let's get over to pitcher of the day. Let's pull it up here. There we go. Duke Stone of Mississippi State, 4 innings pitched, no hits, no runs, no walks, 6 strikeouts again. That was in where do I have the score here? I always lose these. Mississippi, 20, of course, 26-0. That was that game. Duke Stone, 4 strong innings there, 4 hitless innings in that start. They didn't have to push him any more than that because they had already broken out for a huge lead, had Mississippi State, so you didn't really need to push Duke Stone any further than that. Got him out of there relatively early. For Texas A&M in that win over Oakland, Aiden Sims, 5 innings pitched, 4 hits, no runs, no walks, 4 strikeouts. Zane Adams for Alabama against North Florida gave up 2 runs on 5 hits in 5 innings. Dylan Vignew in Game 2 of the Georgia doubleheader sweep of Queens. He threw a 7-inning complete game, 1 hit, no runs, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts. And I was going to highlight him there because he is the pitcher of the day. But we move on. Brandon Stone in Game 2 of the doubleheader win over Princeton for South Carolina. He came on in relief in that game of Riley Goodman, closed it out with 3 2/3 innings, scoreless, no walks, 5 strikeouts. Landon Mack, a gritty start there against Wright State. Gave up 2 runs on 3 hits. He did walk 4. That is not necessarily what you're looking for there, but 5 relatively solid innings there for him. LJ Mercurius continues to just absolutely roll for the Sooners in their 8-0 win over Santa Clara. He threw 6 innings, 4 hits, no runs, no walks with 6 strikeouts. Hunter Dietz continues to move in a positive direction. A couple of rough starts early in the year, and now stacking positive starts on top of each other last 2 weeks. 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, 1 run. It was unearned, no walks, and 12 strikeouts. Then finally, Josh McDevitt for Missouri in the that is also, I should have written Game 2 in there. Game 2 of yesterday for Missouri. 5 innings pitched, 1 hit, no runs, 6 walks, and 7 strikeouts. But again, Dylan Vignew with that 7-inning complete game is the pitcher of the day. All right, final thing. Let's talk about a game to watch today. And of course, it is LSU against Sacramento State. There are other games of interest. Certainly Florida High Point is one. Can Florida salvage something from the weekend, or are they really going to get swept by High Point, which, High Point's a good team. I should have emphasized that earlier. It's the team that here at D1 Baseball we picked to win the Big South. So not an easy test necessarily, but didn't expect them to lose the series and certainly didn't expect them to go into Sunday needing to salvage a win. But we'll see about that. But LSU Sac State, is how game will Sac State be? I think there's 2 scenarios here. I think they're either emboldened by the win yesterday and they come out playing pretty well today. And I think there's also a scenario where LSU comes out playing a little tight, given that now all of a sudden this game has stakes attached to it. But I also think there's a scenario where LSU just comes out and rolls for a number of reasons. One, how good is Sac State's Sunday pitching? TBD on that. Certainly I'm not an expert on Sac State's roster, but Sunday pitching in general can be dicey. How much does Sac State have left on the mound? That is one variable. Was yesterday's loss a wake-up call? But you'd think the Northeastern loss on Monday, the UL loss on Wednesday, those would have been wake-up calls, and I thought they were when LSU came out and scored 15 runs on Friday, but apparently not. They came out and just looked a little flat on Saturday. So I say all that to say, there are kind of a handful of different scenarios I could see for this game between LSU and Sac State. I think it helps that William Schmidt is on the mound, a guy who's been super steady so far, and we will see. I'm certainly going to have my ears on that one. I'll probably be listening as I drive back to the Carolinas after my broadcast today to get caught up on what's happening in that one. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Thanks for hanging with me on a pre-recorded episode. My apologies again. Next weekend, back to live shows. Should be live shows all 3 days next weekend. Very much looking forward to it. But for now, enjoy the baseball today, and I'll talk to you.